Before we go any further, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Because once you see what happens behind these walls, you won't look at a prison meal the same way again. This is the food served to the most dangerous inmates in America. The metal tray hit the concrete floor with a sharp clang that echoed down the tier. Guards froze. Inmates stepped back. In a maximum security unit housing some of the most dangerous men in America, even a dropped food tray could be the spark that lit a riot. It happened just after lockdown, inside a facility designed to hold killers, gang leaders, and men who had already proven they had nothing left to lose. The inmate on the ground didn't yell. He didn't complain. He simply stared at the spilled food, pale meat loaf, overcooked vegetables, a scoop of something unidentifiable, as if it had betrayed him. Moments later, alarm screamed through the block. By morning, one man was dead, another was in solitary, and investigators were asking a question no one expected. Did a meal help trigger the violence? Inside America's most secure prisons, food is never just food. It's currency. It's control. It's survival. And sometimes, it's the final insult that pushes already volatile men past the point of restraint. This story begins with a quiet transfer into a Supermax facility in the Midwest. The inmate, known to guards only by his number, had a reputation, multiple assaults, suspected gang ties, and a history of testing boundaries. On his first night, he received the same tray as everyone else. No special treatment. No explanations. Just a meal designed to meet minimum nutritional standards and maximum cost efficiency. But word spread fast. The portions were smaller than expected. The protein was processed. The taste was punishment. In a place where respect keeps you alive, even food could be read as a message. Investigators later learned that the kitchen had recently changed suppliers. Corners were cut. Quality dropped. Complaints piled up, quietly, at first. Then tensions started boiling over. Fights broke out in the yard. Alliances shifted. Guards noticed inmates skipping meals, trading food, hoarding items meant to be eaten immediately. One former corrections officer would later say, "When the food changes, everything changes." The turning point came when security footage revealed something chilling. On the night of the fatal incident, several inmates had refused to eat. They weren't protesting. They were preparing. And when officials opened the sealed kitchen storage room the next morning, what they found suggested the food was never the real issue at all. By the next morning, the prison was locked down so tight it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Meals were suspended. Doors stayed sealed. Guards moved in pairs, hands hovering near their radios, eyes scanning faces that showed nothing and everything at once. Whatever had started with that spilled tray had grown into something far more dangerous. Investigators began pulling footage from every camera that overlooked the cell block, the kitchen corridor, and the narrow hallway leading to segregation. What they saw was unsettling. In the days before the killing, several high-risk inmates had altered their routines. They stopped lining up for meals. They passed trays untouched back through the slot. Some scraped food into plastic bags, hiding it inside vents or mattress seams. Food wasn't being rejected. It was being repurposed. At the center of the investigation was the man who had dropped the tray. His name was rarely spoken, but his reputation carried weight. He wasn't the strongest inmate on the tier, but he was strategic. Former gang intelligence linked him to outside contacts and internal enforcers, men who enforced unwritten rules when the system failed to. The autopsy report arrived quietly. The victim hadn't died from a weapon smuggled in from outside. He'd been poisoned. Traces of bacteria, commonly associated with spoiled food, were found in his system at lethal levels. The conclusion sent a ripple of fear through the administration. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. It was planned, patient, and disturbingly clever. Attention shifted to the kitchen. Behind layers of steel doors sat one of the most tightly controlled areas of the prison, staffed by inmates considered low risk. Or so officials thought. Records showed multiple substitutions in meal components over the past month. Cheaper proteins, extended shelf life products, reduced inspections. On paper, everything looked compliant. In reality, it created opportunity. An inmate kitchen worker disappeared the same night as the killing. His cell was empty. His tray untouched. His mattress neatly folded. It was as if he'd evaporated. Guards later found him in protective custody, shaken and silent. When he finally spoke, he told investigators something that changed the direction of the case. There was a rule inside these walls. Not written. Not spoken out loud. Break it, and you were marked. The victim had broken it by refusing to share food during a shortage. In a place where meals could mean survival, that single act was seen as a declaration of war. And the message was delivered through the one thing everyone had to touch, their food. As lockdown stretched into its third day, officials realized they weren't just dealing with a murder. They were dealing with a system that had allowed control to slip away, one tray at a time. As the investigation tightened, fear began to spread in a way no lockdown ever could. Meals resumed under heavy supervision, but trays came back half-eaten, or not eaten at all. Inmates stared at their food longer than they stared at each other. Every bite carried doubt. Every swallow felt like a gamble. Word traveled faster than any official announcement. Someone had turned food into a weapon, and no one knew where the line was drawn. Investigators uncovered a pattern buried deep in incident reports and medical logs. Over the past year, there had been a rise in unexplained illnesses among high-risk inmates: violent vomiting, sudden fevers, severe dehydration. Each case had been written off as food intolerance, stress, or pre-existing conditions. Taken alone, they were forgettable. Together, they told a different story. Food shortages had quietly reshaped the power structure inside the prison. When portions shrank and quality dropped, meals became currency. Those who controlled access, kitchen workers, runners, cell block shot callers, gained influence. Refusing to share, hoarding trays, or disrespecting the wrong person during chow wasn't just rude. It was dangerous. The victim had crossed that invisible line twice. First, by refusing to trade part of his meal during a week when deliveries were delayed. Second, by reporting a kitchen worker for skimming food. In any other environment, it would have been seen as compliance. Inside these walls, it was betrayal. Surveillance footage revealed a quiet exchange days before the killing. A tray passed between cells. A nod. A hand slipping something unseen beneath grey protein loaf. No guards noticed. No alarms triggered. It looked ordinary, which was the point. The suspect investigators had been tracking wasn't acting alone. He was enforcing the rule. The one everyone knew but no one dared explain to newcomers. Never interfere with food, and never expose those who control it. Tensions reached a breaking point when another inmate collapsed in his cell, clutching his stomach, screaming for help. Medical staff rushed in. This time, they caught it early. Contamination. Deliberate. The same bacteria. The same method. The prison realized too late that the first death hadn't been the message. It had been the warning. Protective custody units filled. Kitchen access was stripped from inmate workers. Guards took over food distribution, awkward and untrained. Order returned on the surface, but something had changed underneath. The rule still existed. It always would. The question wasn't whether the system had failed. It was whether anyone inside, inmate or guard, truly controlled it anymore. The final confrontation didn't come with sirens or a dramatic takedown. It came quietly, in paperwork, interviews, and a decision made behind closed doors. Federal investigators stepped in after the second poisoning attempt. That was the line the prison couldn't contain. Files were pulled. Budgets examined. Kitchen contracts scrutinized. What they uncovered painted a grim picture: cost-cutting measures that reduced food quality to dangerous levels, inspections signed off without checks, and a system that relied on inmates to police themselves because staffing shortages left no alternative. The suspect everyone feared was never formally charged with murder. Instead, he was transferred. No announcement. No explanation. One morning his cell was empty, his name quietly removed from the roster. Inside the prison, that was all the confirmation anyone needed. The kitchen worker who spoke up disappeared too, released early under a sealed agreement. His testimony never made headlines. It didn't need to. The prison administration already knew what it had allowed to happen. The official cause of death was ruled complications related to contaminated food. No mention of retaliation. No reference to the unwritten rule. On paper, it was a tragedy. Inside, it was justice served the only way this place understood. In the months that followed, menus were updated. Portions increased slightly. Oversight returned, at least during inspections. But inmates noticed something else. Nobody reported kitchen violations anymore. Nobody refused to share food. Nobody questioned where their meal came from. The rule had been reinforced. A former guard later described it best in a confidential interview. He said the prison didn't run on laws or regulations. It ran on understanding. And once you understood what not to touch, what not to question, you survived. The victim's name faded from conversation, replaced by a warning passed from cell to cell, tier to tier. Don't interfere with food. Don't expose control. Don't forget where you are. Years later, when reporters asked officials if the system had improved, they pointed to policy changes and new procedures. But those inside knew the truth. Rikers Island hadn't changed. It had adapted. And the one rule that gets you killed. It was never about violence. It was about crossing the invisible line between survival and power, a line drawn not in ink, but in silence, fear, and a tray slid through a steel door.